My name is Rachel Morgan and I'm 34 years old. I spent the last 5 years building my medical clinic from nothing but a dream and student loan debt in a rural Montana town that desperately needed healthcare. Now that it's finally successful, my family members are suddenly appearing with their hands out, expecting jobs, partnerships, and profit shares without ever having contributed a single penny or word of encouragement. The shock of their entitlement has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. If you've ever built something from scratch only to have others try to claim it, you'll understand my heartbreak. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe to follow my journey of standing up for what I've built with my own two hands. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, where my parents settled after my grandparents immigrated from Ireland in the 1950s. Our apartment was small but functional, housing my parents, my older brother Jason, my younger sister Amber, and me. Dad worked as a city bus driver, and Mom juggled part-time jobs at the local diner and a department store. Money was always tight, but we had food on the table and clothes on our backs. From an early age I witnessed my parents' financial struggles. The stack of bills on the kitchen counter seemed to grow taller each month. I remember the hushed arguments late at night about which utility payment could be delayed, the stress etched into my mother's face when my father's back injury kept him out of work for 3 months, and the embarrassment of using food stamps at the grocery store. These experiences shaped my determination to create financial stability for myself. I threw myself into schoolwork, seeing education as my ticket to a better life. While my siblings seemed content to drift through school with average grades, I stayed up late studying by the dim light of a desk lamp in the bedroom I shared with Amber. The day my acceptance letter to Northwestern University arrived was the first time I saw my father cry. Holding that letter, I felt a mix of pride and terror. The scholarship covered tuition, but there were still books, housing, and living expenses to consider. My parents sat me down that evening and explained they couldn't contribute financially to my education, not a penny. Jason had dropped out of community college after 1 semester, and they were saving what little they could for Amber, who was showing more interest in college than my brother had. I understood their reasoning, but it still stung. College became a blur of classes, study sessions, and jobs. I worked as a library assistant on weekdays, waited tables on weekends, and tutored high school students whenever I could squeeze in a session. During summer breaks, I picked up extra shifts at a medical supplies company, fascinated by the equipment and the healthcare professionals who came in. Despite my hectic schedule, I maintained a 3.9 PA and set my sights on medical school. The medical school acceptance letter from the University of Wisconsin arrived during my senior year. I called home immediately, bursting with excitement. Mom seemed happy but distracted, quickly changing the subject to Jason's latest business idea, a food truck concept he needed just a few $1,000s to launch. Dad congratulated me but warned me about taking on more debt. Neither asked how I would pay for it or offered to help. By then I'd grown accustomed to their limited enthusiasm for my academic pursuits. Medical school brought $327, zero in student loans. That number kept me up at night, a crushing weight that sometimes made it hard to breathe, but the alternative, giving up on my dream, felt even heavier, so I signed those loan papers one after another, watching the debt pile up while I memorized the bones in the human body and learned to suture wounds on practice dummies. Those 4 years nearly broke me. There were nights I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by textbooks, crying from exhaustion. Weeks when I survived on ramen noodles and coffee, moments when I seriously considered dropping out to become a high school science teacher instead. What kept me going were the patients I met during clinical rotations, the elderly man who squeezed my hand in gratitude after I took the time to explain his medication, the teenage girl who confided in me about her depression when she wouldn't talk to anyone else, the young mother who wept with relief when her baby's fever finally broke. During my 3rd year, I completed a rural medicine rotation in northern Wisconsin. The experience changed my trajectory completely. The small clinic served 3 counties, and the physicians there practiced truly comprehensive medicine, delivering babies, setting broken bones, managing chronic diseases, even performing emergency procedures when the nearest hospital was too far away. The community's appreciation was palpable, with patients bringing homemade bread and fresh vegetables as tokens of gratitude. I fell in love with rural medicine, with being a true healer rather than a specialist focusing on one body system. When I announced my intention to pursue family medicine instead of cardiology or dermatology, my classmates looked at me with confusion. But the money, they'd say, trailing off as if I'd lost my mind. My advisors warned me about the lower salary potential. The long hours, the challenges of rural practice, I understood their concerns but couldn't ignore my calling. My graduation day arrived with surprising little fanfare from my family. Mom claimed she couldn't get time off work. Dad's back was acting up again. Jason was in between jobs and couldn't afford the trip. And Amber had a dance recital she couldn't miss. I sat among my peers as they celebrated with their families, taking photos and receiving flowers, trying not to feel the emptiness beside me. My college roommate's parents took me to dinner afterward, insisting I was practically family after all these years. Their kindness both soothed and highlighted the absence of my actual family. That night, alone in my apartment, I made a decision that would shape the next chapter of my life. I would forge my own path, build something meaningful, and create the support system I'd always longed for. I would become the kind of doctor who truly makes a difference in people's lives. And I would do it all on my own terms. 2 months after graduation, I found myself driving a U-Haul truck loaded with my meager possessions into Prairie Creek, Montana. Population 342, the town was nestled between rolling hills and expansive wheat fields, with a main street that featured a grocery store, a hardware shop, a diner, a bank, and not much else. What it didn't have was a doctor not within a 70-mile radius. I'd learned about Prairie Creek during a medical conference focused on healthcare deserts in America. The previous physician had retired 3 years earlier, and despite recruitment efforts, no one wanted to practice in such a remote location. Residents had to drive over an hour to reach the nearest hospital in Great Falls, which meant many simply went without care until conditions became emergencies. The mortality rates from treatable conditions were staggering. During my first week in town, I stayed at the only motel and spent my days walking around, introducing myself to locals and learning about the community's needs. I met Eleanor Wright, a 78-year-old woman who managed her diabetes by feeling when her sugar was high because she couldn't make the drive to get her prescriptions refilled regularly. I spoke with John Peterson, who'd lost his wife to a heart attack last winter when the ambulance couldn't reach their farm during a blizzard in time. And I encountered dozens of children who'd never had proper well-child checks or immunization. On day 6, I discovered an abandoned building that had once housed a hardware store before the bigger one opened on the edge of town. The space was roughly 30 square feet, with broken windows, water damage in one corner, and a family of raccoons living in what would later become the reception area. But the structure was sound, the location central, and the price $85, zero within the realm of possibility with another loan. Getting that loan proved nearly impossible with my student debt. I visited First Prairie Bank with my business plan, projected earnings, and market analysis. The loan officer, Martin Davies, looked at my numbers and shook his head. "Your debt-to-income ratio is prohibitive, Dr. Morgan," he explained, "and frankly, most small medical practices fail within the first 3 years. I left feeling defeated but returned the next day and the next, refining my plan, bringing in more data, and showcasing successful rural practice models. On my 4th visit, Martin finally relented, approving a $200 zero business loan with strict terms and a higher-than-ideal interest rate. The renovation nightmare began immediately. The building needed everything new: electrical wiring, plumbing, roof repairs, walls constructed to create examination rooms, reception area, a lab space, storage, and my office. I hired local contractors where possible, but often found myself sanding drywall at midnight or painting walls at dawn to save money. Every discovery brought new expenses: black mold behind a wall, asbestos in the ceiling tiles, a cracked foundation beam. My carefully calculated budget strained and then burst, requiring another $50 zero loan from the bank. To reduce expenses, I moved into the back office, setting up a cot, a mini fridge, and a microwave. I showered at the local gym and did laundry at the laundromat, all while trying to maintain the professional appearance of a physician. Those first 6 months, I existed in a perpetual state of dust, paint fumes, and exhaustion. The clinic finally opened on a snowy Tuesday in November. I'd ordered the minimal equipment necessary: an examination table, basic diagnostic tools, a centrifuge for blood work, and essential medications. My staff consisted of just me: doctor, receptionist, nurse, lab technician, and janitor all in one. The opening day brought 8 patients, mostly curious locals wanting to meet the new lady doctor. By the end of the first week, word had spread, and I was seeing 20 patients a day. Those early years tested every ounce of my resolve. I worked 80-hour weeks, seeing patients from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., then handling paperwork, ordering supplies, and cleaning until midnight. I made house calls during blizzards, delivering medications to elderly patients who couldn't drive in the snow. I bartered services when patients couldn't pay, accepting fresh eggs, handmade quilts, and lawn mowing in exchange for treatment. Every dollar the clinic earned went back into the business or toward my loan payments, leaving me with just enough for ramen noodles and coffee again. The turning point came 4 months in when I delivered Maisie Carter's baby during a power outage. Maisie had gone into labor during a severe storm that knocked out electricity throughout the county and made the roads to Great Falls impassable. Her husband Frank brought her to the clinic in his pickup truck, panic in his eyes as she screamed through contractions in the passenger seat. With only emergency lights powered by a small generator, I delivered healthy Emma Carter by flashlight, with Frank holding a second light steady. News of the successful delivery spread through town like wildfire, cementing my place in the community. 6 months after opening, I hired Nancy Fletcher, a retired nurse who had moved to Prairie Creek to be closer to her grandchildren. Nancy walked into the clinic one afternoon, took one look at my exhausted face, and announced, "You need help, and I need something to do besides baking cookies for my grandkids." Her 30 years of nursing experience proved invaluable, and her salary became my first major business expense. Nancy became more than an employee. She was a mentor, confidant, and the closest thing to family I had in Prairie Creek. She taught me about the community's history, advised me on patient relationships, and occasionally brought me home-cooked meals when she suspected I was subsisting on vending machine snacks. "You're doing God's work here," she told me once, "but even angels need to eat proper food." The first year the clinic barely broke even. The second year showed a small profit, which I immediately reinvested in a proper X-ray machine. By year 3, I had hired a receptionist, another nurse, and a part-time lab technician. We had expanded our services to include basic physical therapy, preventative care programs, and chronic disease management. The patient load had grown to include residents from neighboring towns and counties, some driving 2 hours to see us. That third year marked the first time I felt like I could breathe. I finally moved out of the clinic's back office and rented a small house 2 blocks away. I bought new clothes to replace the worn-out wardrobe I'd been rotating for years. I even splurged on a decent coffee maker for the break room. The crushing weight of debt remained, but it no longer seemed insurmountable. What sustained me through those grueling early years wasn't just determination, it was the community. Mrs. Gunderson brought me a homemade pie every Wednesday. Mr. Torres plowed the clinic's driveway without being asked after every snowfall. The high school woodshop class built bookshelves for the waiting room. The local newspaper ran a feature titled "Angel in a White Coat," which brought tears to my eyes when I read it alone in my office. All the while, my family remained distant figures in my life. Occasional phone calls revealed that Jason had cycled through 3 more business ventures, Ember had dropped out of college to pursue acting, and my parents were still struggling financially. Not once did they ask about the clinic or offer encouragement. Not once did they visit. In their absence, Prairie Creek became my family, my home, my foundation. By the end of year 3, looking around at what I'd built from nothing, I felt a pride so profound it almost overwhelmed me. The clinic wasn't just a business, it was tangible proof that belief, hard work, and perseverance could create something meaningful, something that changed lives, something entirely mine. 5 years after that snowy opening day, Prairie Creek Family Clinic had transformed beyond my wildest dreams. The once dilapidated building now stood as a modern medical facility with gleaming floors, comfortable waiting areas, and state-of-the-art equipment. We'd expanded twice, breaking through walls to add more examination rooms, a larger laboratory, and a dedicated physical therapy space. The staff had grown to 15 full-time employees, 3 nurses, 2 physician assistants I'd brought on to help with the patient load, a physical therapist, lab technicians, administrative staff, and a dedicated billing specialist who navigated the complexities of insurance claims and Medicare reimbursements. Our patient base extended across 3 counties, with people driving from as far as 150 miles away for care. We maintained electronic medical records and offered telehealth consultations for follow-ups and minor issues, a rarity in rural medicine that saved patients long drives during harsh Montana winters. The clinic provided comprehensive services: preventative care, chronic disease management, minor surgical procedures, prenatal care, pediatrics, geriatrics, and basic emergency services. We coordinated with the hospital in Great Falls for cases beyond our capabilities, establishing a smooth transfer protocol that had saved numerous lives. The transformation wasn't just physical. My own professional reputation had grown throughout the state medical community. I'd been invited to speak at the Montana Rural Health Association's annual conference, sharing our clinic's model as a success story. The American Academy of Family Physicians had featured our telehealth program in their journal, highlighting innovative approaches to rural medicine. The governor had even visited during a tour of successful rural development initiatives, shaking my hand for a photo that now hung in the clinic's main hallway. Perhaps most meaningful was the article in the Prairie Creek Herald titled "Guardian Angel: How Dr. Morgan Saved Our Town." The piece chronicled the clinic's impact on the community, featuring testimonials from patients whose lives had been changed or saved by having local access to healthcare. I kept a copy in my desk drawer, pulling it out on particularly challenging days to remind myself why I'd chosen this path. My personal life had stabilized as well. After years of pinching pennies, I'd purchased a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom home overlooking the creek that gave the town its name. The mortgage payment was substantial but manageable now that the clinic consistently turned a profit. I'd refinanced my student loans, consolidating them into a payment plan that no longer caused panic attacks. For the first time since childhood, I had savings in the bank, not much but enough to create a sense of security I'd never known. Last spring, I'd even taken my first real vacation in 5 years, a week in Hawaii where I did nothing but read novels on the beach, eat fresh seafood, and sleep uninterrupted by emergency calls. Nancy had insisted I go, practically pushing me onto the plane. "This place won't fall apart without you for 7 days," she'd said. "You've built something that can stand on its own now." She was right, and returning to find everything running smoothly had been both a relief and a validation. The deep connection I'd formed with the community continued to be the most rewarding aspect of my work. I knew my patients as people, not just medical records. I remembered their children's names, asked about their elderly parents, celebrated their milestones, and mourned their losses. They in turn had embraced me as one of their own. Mrs. Peterson brought fresh eggs from her farm every Monday. Mr. Wilkins, a retired carpenter, had crafted a beautiful oak desk for my office as thanks for managing his heart condition. The elementary school children made me cards during National Doctors Week. These gestures meant more to me than any professional accolade. Even my personal life had blossomed unexpectedly. 6 months ago I'd met Thomas Bennett, the new high school principal, when he came in for a physical required by the school district. Our professional interaction had led to coffee, then dinner, and now a relationship that brought a different kind of joy to my life. Thomas understood the demands of my profession and supported my commitment to the community. He showed up at the clinic with lunch when I worked late, listened attentively when I needed to process difficult cases, and never complained when emergencies interrupted our plans. For the first time, I was experiencing a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. My vision for the clinic continued to expand. The opioid crisis had hit rural Montana hard, and mental health services were practically non-existent in our region. I'd begun researching grants to fund a behavioral health division, hoping to bring in a psychiatrist who could provide medication management via telehealth and a counselor for in-person therapy. The need was enormous, with the nearest mental health provider over 100 miles away and a 3-month waiting list. The clinic's 5th anniversary celebration had been a community event held in the town square. Patients shared stories of how the clinic had impacted their lives. Mayor Wilson presented me with a key to the city. The high school band played while children enjoyed face painting and adults toured the clinic's newest addition. Standing on that makeshift stage looking out at the hundreds of faces of people I'd cared for, I felt a sense of belonging I'd never experienced with my biological family. Thomas had squeezed my hand as I fought back tears during my speech. "You've done something extraordinary here," he whispered. "You should be proud." And I was deeply, profoundly proud of what I'd built from nothing but determination and a dream. The little girl from Chicago who'd studied by dim lamplight had created something meaningful, something lasting, something that truly mattered. I never imagined that the greatest threat to what I'd built would come not from financial challenges, bureaucratic hurdles, or professional burnout, but from the very people who shared my blood, the people who should have been my strongest supporters but had been conspicuously absent during my struggles. The family that was about to test the boundaries of my compassion and resolve in ways I never anticipated. The first sign of trouble came on an ordinary Tuesday morning in April. I was reviewing lab results between patient appointments when my cell phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years: Jason Morgan. My brother and I hadn't spoken in over 3 years. Not since Christmas, when he'd asked for a small loan of $5, to invest in cryptocurrency. Like his previous ventures, the food truck, the house flipping scheme, the online dropship business, this investment opportunity required capital he didn't have but was guaranteed to pay off. I'd declined, citing my clinic expenses and student loans, which had led to a tense holiday dinner and sporadic communication since. My heart jumped at seeing his name. Despite our complicated relationship, he was still my brother. Had something happened to our parents? Was he ill? I answered with concern in my voice. Jason, is everything okay? Hey Ratch, his voice was upbeat, lacking the urgency I'd expected. Long time no talk. How's my favorite doctor sister? Relief mixed with wariness as I responded, I'm good. Busy with the clinic. Is everything alright with you, with mom and dad? Everyone's fine. Just thought it was time to catch up, you know. Heard your clinic is really taking off these days. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily at first. Jason shared updates about his latest job at a marketing firm, asked about Montana, and laughed at my stories about quirky local patients. For 15 minutes, I felt the warmth of reconnecting with my brother, the playmate of my childhood, the person who'd taught me to ride a bike and defended me from neighborhood bullies. Then came the pivot. So I've been thinking, he said, his tone shifting slightly. I'm kind of at a crossroads with this marketing thing. The corporate world isn't really for me, you know. A familiar knot formed in my stomach. Oh, what are you considering instead? Well, I was looking at your clinic's website, really impressive stuff by the way, and I noticed you've grown quite a bit. Got me thinking that you probably need someone to handle the business side of things, office management, marketing, growth strategy. That's right in my wheelhouse. The knot tightened. We do have an office manager, Barbara. She's been with us for 3 years. But does she have my expertise in digital marketing, my connections, my fresh perspective? His voice took on the same enthusiastic pitch he'd used when describing his cryptocurrency opportunity. I've been researching rural healthcare. There's so much potential for expansion. Maybe even opening satellite clinics in neighboring towns. I could help with all of that. Jason, running a medical practice requires specific knowledge and experience, which I can learn. I'm a quick study, you know that, and who better to help grow your business than family, someone who has your best interests at heart? When I didn't immediately respond, he continued, I could move out there next month. I'm ready for a change of scenery anyway, just need to figure out compensation. I'm thinking a starting salary of around $85. 0 plus benefits would be fair, with performance bonuses and maybe profit sharing after 6 months. The figure significantly higher than what my actual office manager earned after years of dedicated service and healthcare experience left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, he added, oh, and I'd need help with relocation expenses. Of course, first month's rent, security deposit, moving costs, maybe $10. 0 would cover it. Memories flooded back. Jason dropping out of community college after 1 semester despite our parents paying his tuition, his pattern of jumping from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, the times he'd borrowed money from me in college and never repaid it, the string of girlfriends who'd supported him financially until they grew tired of his empty promises. I took a deep breath and responded as diplomatically as possible. I appreciate your interest, Jason, but we have specific hiring processes and qualifications for all positions. If you're serious about healthcare administration, I'd suggest getting some experience or certification first. If a position opens up that matches your skills, you'd be welcome to apply through proper channels, just like any candidate. His tone cooled instantly. Proper channels? I'm your brother, Rachel. I thought family looked out for each other. They do, but a medical practice isn't a family business. It's a healthcare institution with responsibilities to patients and the community. I can't just create a high-level position. You mean you won't? He interrupted, after everything our family did for you. The comment stung. What exactly did our family do for me, Jason? I worked my way through college, took out massive loans for medical school, built this clinic from nothing while all of you were too busy to even visit. There it is, the superiority complex. You think you're better than us because you're a doctor. His voice had taken on the defensive edge I remembered from childhood arguments. You know what? Forget it. I was trying to do you a favor. Plenty of other opportunities out there for someone with my talents. The call ended abruptly, leaving me shaken. I sat in my office, staring at the wall, trying to process what had just happened. Had I been too harsh? Was I being selfish? The rational part of my brain knew I'd responded appropriately, but the part still seeking family approval felt guilty and conflicted. I didn't have long to dwell on these feelings. The next evening, my phone rang with my parents' number. Mom's voice came through with uncharacteristic warmth. Rachel, sweetheart, it's been too long since we've talked. Again, the conversation started normally, updates about neighbors back in Chicago, complaints about Dad's arthritis, questions about Montana weather. Then came the real purpose of the call. So we spoke with Jason yesterday, Mom said, her tone shifting. He mentioned you might have an opportunity for him at your clinic. I pinched the bridge of my nose. That's not exactly what happened, Mom. Well, he said you needed someone with his business expertise but weren't sure about bringing family into the business. I think it's a wonderful idea. He really needs a fresh start, and who better to help him than his successful sister? Mom, the clinic isn't in a position to create a new executive role, especially for someone with no healthcare experience. Experience isn't everything, Rachel. Loyalty matters too. Your brother would be dedicated because it's family. You can't put a price on that. When I didn't immediately agree, she deployed the guilt tactic I knew all too well. After all we've done for you, I'm surprised you wouldn't jump at the chance to help your brother. We sacrificed so much for your education. What sacrifices exactly? The words escaped before I could stop them. I worked my way through college, took out loans for medical school. You and Dad didn't contribute financially at all. There's more to support than money, Rachel Elizabeth. We gave you emotional support. We raised you with values and work ethic. We encouraged your dreams. I bit back the response that threatened to escape that I couldn't recall much encouragement, just absence and disinterest. Instead, I sighed. I understand you want to help Jason, but I have to make business decisions based on what's best for the clinic and our patients. Family should come first, she insisted always. Dad got on the phone next, his approach more direct. Your brother needs this opportunity, Rachel. He's had some bad breaks. Not everyone is as naturally driven as you are. This isn't about drive, Dad. It's about qualifications and experience. He can learn on the job. You'd be training him anyway. That's not how it works in healthcare. We have regulatory requirements, standards. Sounds like excuses to me, he interrupted. Sounds like you've forgotten where you came from. The conversation deteriorated from there, ending with my mother in tears and my father's disappointed silence. I hung up feeling emotionally drained and unfairly vilified. Over the next week, the campaign intensified. My sister Amber sent a series of social media messages about wanting to invest in the clinic despite having no assets to invest, suggesting she could be a silent partner entitled to profit distributions. Cousin Brad, whom I hadn't seen since high school, showed up unannounced at the clinic reception desk, asking to speak with me about a family matter. He wanted me to hire his wife Kelly, a former retail manager with no medical background, as my personal assistant at a generous salary. Uncle Richard called my direct line, having obtained the number somehow, to discuss consulting opportunities for his newly established healthcare advisory firm, a business that existed only on hastily printed business cards. Aunt Linda, always the family gossip, began spreading stories at family gatherings back in Chicago that I had abandoned my roots and thought I was too good for family now that I'm successful. The most disturbing development was discovering a family group chat titled Prairie Creek Opportunities, where relatives I barely knew were discussing potential roles they could fill at Rachel's clinic. Screenshots forwarded by a concerned cousin showed messages like, "She owes us this chance, and the clinic must be making bank by now." Each night I returned home with growing anxiety, checking my phone with dread to see which family member would approach next with hands outstretched. Sleep became elusive as I replayed conversations in my head, questioning my responses and my obligations. The clinic, once my sanctuary, now felt threatened by the very people who should have been celebrating my hard-earned success. Thomas noticed the change in me. "You seem distracted lately," he observed one evening as we sat on my porch. "Is it the clinic expansion plans?" I hesitated, then shared the whole situation. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly concerned. "Rachel, this isn't normal family behavior," he said finally. "You built something incredible through years of sacrifice and hard work. They weren't there for the struggle, but they won in for the rewards. That's not how family is supposed to work." His validation brought tears to my eyes, tears I'd been holding back for weeks, but they make me feel like I'm the selfish one for saying no. "That's called manipulation," he said gently, "and from what you've told me, it's a pattern that goes back to your childhood." The floodgates opened then, and I sobbed against his shoulder, releasing years of complicated family emotions, the longing for approval, the hurt of neglect, the anger at their sudden interest coinciding with the clinic's success. Thomas held me through it all, a steady presence in the storm of my family drama. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The situation was building toward a confrontation that would force me to make the most difficult choice of my life: peace with my family or protection of everything I'd built. The annual Morgan family reunion was scheduled for July at my Aunt Linda's house in suburban Chicago. I'd skipped the previous 4 years, citing clinic responsibilities, but with Thomas's encouragement, I decided to attend this year. "Maybe face-to-face conversation will clear the air," he suggested, Besides, I'd like to meet the family I've heard so much about. I booked flights, arranged coverage at the clinic, and prepared myself emotionally for what I hoped would be a chance to reconnect positively with my family. Thomas's presence gave me confidence. Surely they wouldn't press their demands with him there. The moment we stepped through Aunt Linda's front door, I sensed something was off. Conversations halted abruptly, heads turned, tight smiles appeared. Jason approached immediately, warmth not quite reaching his eyes as he embraced me. "The prodigal sister returns," he announced loudly, making a show of the greeting, "and she's brought reinforcements," he added, eyeing Thomas with unconcealed suspicion. Mom fussed over us, offering drinks and food while peppering me with questions about the clinic that felt like reconnaissance rather than genuine interest. Dad gave me a brief hug, then retreated to watch baseball with his brothers. Amber circulated around us like a curious shark, dropping hints about her acting career needing just a little financial boost to take off. For the first hour, we maintained a facade of normal family interaction. Thomas charmed my elderly relatives with stories about his high school teaching experiences. I caught up with cousins I genuinely liked, careful to steer conversations away from my professional life. The tension remained just below the surface, like static electricity before a storm. The storm broke during dinner. 23 of us crowded around tables in Aunt Linda's backyard, paper plates balanced on our laps, plastic cups of beer and sodas at our feet. Uncle Richard clinked his fork against his glass, calling for attention. "Since we have the whole family together, which is rare these days," he began, with a pointed look in my direction, "I think it's time we discuss the Morgan family's next chapter. As many of you know, our Rachel has built quite a successful medical empire out in Montana." Empire, the clinic barely cleared enough profit to cover expenses and loan payments. "I've been thinking," he continued, "that this represents a unique opportunity for our family. Healthcare is one of the most stable industries, especially in rural areas with limited competition. Rachel's clinic could be just the beginning of a family enterprise that benefits all of us." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. I sat frozen, Thomas's hand finding mine under the table. "Richard, I don't think this is the right time," I started. "When would be the right time, Rachel?" Jason interrupted. "You've been avoiding our calls and messages for months. Some of us have made life decisions based on opportunities at your clinic that you're now backing away from." "What life decisions?" I asked, genuinely confused. "I quit my job last month," he announced. "I've given notice on my apartment. I'm ready to move to Montana and help run the business side of things." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "You quit your job, without even confirming a position with me first?" "You're my sister," he said, as if that explained everything. "I know you'll do the right thing once you see how serious I am about this." Aunt Linda chimed in. "Family businesses are a tradition as old as time. The Kennedys, the Waltons, the Morgans has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" "The clinic isn't a family business," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's a healthcare practice built on professional qualifications and experience. I can't just hand out jobs to relatives with no medical background." "So you think you're better than us now?" Ember challenged, eyes narrowing. "Too good for the family that supported you all these years?" "Supported me? How exactly? By not attending my medical school graduation? By never once visiting the clinic I built from nothing? By calling only when you need money or favors?" The backyard fell silent. Mom's face crumpled in what appeared to be genuine hurt. "Rachel, how can you say such things? We've always been there for you." "When?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. "When were you there for me?" "We raised you," Dad said firmly, "put a roof over your head, food on the table, taught you values that made you who you are today." "I'm grateful for my upbringing," I acknowledged, "but that doesn't create an obligation for me to hire family members who aren't qualified for specialized healthcare roles." Uncle Richard leaned forward, his businessman persona taking over. "No one's asking for charity here, Rachel. We're talking about investment and growth. Your clinic could be the cornerstone of a regional healthcare network. With my business acumen, Jason's marketing skills, and family capital, we could expand to multiple locations. The potential is enormous." "Family capital?" I repeated. "What family capital?" "Well, that would come later, of course," he backpedaled. "First, we established the management structure with appropriate salaries and equity distributions." The pieces clicked into place. They wanted control and profit without investment or risk. They saw my years of sacrifice and debt as their opportunity. "I've been completely transparent," I said, struggling to maintain composure. "The clinic is successful in serving the community, but it's not a cash cow. Most rural practices operate on thin margins. I'm still paying off enormous student loans and business loans." All the more reason to bring in family to help, Aunt Linda insisted. We could find efficiencies, increase profitability. Jason has so many ideas already. Jason nodded eagerly. I've been researching healthcare billing. Did you know you can charge insurance companies additional fees for? Stop, I interrupted, just stop. What you're suggesting isn't just impractical, some of it sounds potentially unethical or even illegal. Healthcare isn't about maximizing profit, it's about patient care. Such idealism, Uncle Richard scoffed. This is why you need business people involved. I stood up, my plate nearly sliding off my lap. I need qualified, experienced healthcare professionals who understand medical ethics and patient-centered care. What I don't need is family members with no healthcare background seeing my clinic as their meal ticket. Mom burst into tears. You've changed, Rachel. Success has changed you. You think you're better than us now. This isn't about being better or worse. It's about professional qualifications and responsibilities. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you understand that people's lives depend on the care we provide, that every person I hire impacts patient outcomes? So hire us for non-medical roles, Jason countered. I wouldn't be treating patients, just managing the business. The business is patient care. I was nearly shouting now. Every aspect of the clinic impacts care quality. I can't compromise that for family loyalty. Uncle Richard's expression hardened. I think what we're hearing is that Rachel doesn't consider herself part of this family anymore. She's too important now for the people who raised her. The unfairness of the accusation made my chest tight. That's not, I began, but the words caught in my throat. Pressure built behind my eyes as tears threatened. Excuse me, I managed, turning away from the table of staring relatives. I rushed into the house, finding the downstairs bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the sink, struggling to breathe through the panic attack that had ambushed me. In the mirror, my face looked pale and strained, almost unrecognizable. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and called Thomas, who had stepped away earlier to give me space with my family. I need to leave, I whispered when he answered. I can't do this. Where are you? His concern was immediate. Bathroom, first floor. I'll be right there, we'll go. As I waited, I splashed cold water on my face and tried to compose myself. The conversation replayed in my head, each accusation and demand like a physical blow. The family I'd longed to reconnect with saw me not as a person but as a resource to be exploited. The revelation was both heartbreaking and clarifying. Thomas knocked softly on the door minutes later. We slipped out through the side entrance, avoiding the backyard confrontation. As we drove away in our rental car, the dam broke. I sobbed openly, years of complicated family emotions pouring out while Thomas drove in supportive silence, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand. Back at our hotel, I checked my phone to find 23 missed calls and dozens of messages. Some were angry, Jason, thanks for ruining everything again. Some manipulative, Mom, your father is devastated by your behavior. Some threatening, Uncle Richard, this family discussion isn't over. Most disturbing was my brother's final text, don't worry about the job. I'm moving to Prairie Creek anyway. Small towns always need good business minds. See you soon, sis. The barrage continued through the night and the next day as we flew back to Montana. By the time we landed, I'd turned off notifications from family members, unable to bear more guilt and manipulation. Thomas drove me home in silence, both of us exhausted from the emotional whiplash of the weekend. Walking into my quiet house felt like entering a sanctuary, but even there anxiety followed. Would Jason really move to Prairie Creek? What would he do when I refused to hire him? Would my family's campaign escalate? For the first time, the clinic I'd built with such determination felt vulnerable. Threatened not by external forces but by the very people who should have been my strongest supporters. That night, alone in my bedroom after Thomas left, I broke down completely. Curled in a ball on my bed, I sobbed until no more tears would come, grieving the family I wished I had rather than the one I'd been given. When exhaustion finally claimed me, I fell into restless sleep filled with dreams of being chased through the clinic by shadowy figures claiming to be family. The next morning, I arrived at work to find 3 voicemails from family members who had somehow obtained the clinic's private office line. Worse, Nancy reported that Jason had called the general number twice, asking detailed questions about the clinic's operations, staffing, and finances while claiming to be consulting for me. The final straw came that afternoon when I discovered that several family members had begun contacting my staff directly through LinkedIn and social media, inquiring about positions and suggesting they'd soon be joining the team once Rachel finalizes the arrangement. Sitting in my office after hours, staring at the wall of credentials and community awards that represented years of sacrifice and dedication, I felt something inside me break. The clinic, my sanctuary, my achievement, my contribution to the world, was under siege by the very people who should have been proudest of what I'd built. For the first time since those dark early days of renovation nightmares and impossible loan payments, I put my head down on my desk and wept, alone in the clinic I'd built from nothing but determination and dreams. The morning after my breakdown, I arrived at the clinic early, before any other staff members. I needed the solitude to think clearly, to find my center again, the quiet building with its familiar sounds and smells, the waiting room chairs I'd selected myself, the children's corner filled with books and toys, the walls adorned with patient thank you cards reminded me of everything I'd built and everything at stake. Nancy arrived at 7:30 a.m., as she did every morning. One look at my face told her something was wrong. Without a word, she set down her purse, made 2 cups of coffee, and brought one to my office, closing the door behind her. "Talk to me," she said simply, settling into the chair across from my desk. I'd never been fully transparent with my staff about my family situation, maintaining the professional boundary between personal and work life. But Nancy wasn't just staff, she'd become a mentor, confidant, and the closest thing to a mother figure I had in Prairie Creek. So I told her everything, from my childhood experiences to the family reunion disaster to the current campaign of harassment. Nancy listened without interrupting, her experienced nurse's face revealing nothing but attentive concern. When I finished, she took a long sip of coffee before responding. "Your compassion is your greatest strength as a doctor, Rachel," she said finally, "but it might be your greatest weakness in business, especially when dealing with family who know how to manipulate that compassion." Her words struck a chord. How many times had I bent over backward to avoid conflict, to keep peace, to be the responsible one? "You've built something remarkable here," Nancy continued, "something that matters to this community far more than you probably realize. You have a responsibility to protect it, not just for yourself, but for your patients and staff who depend on it." "But they're my family," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Family supports you, family celebrates your achievements. Family doesn't try to hijack your life's work for their own gain." Nancy's directness was refreshing after months of manipulation and guilt. "What they're doing isn't love or loyalty, it's opportunism." She reached across the desk to pat my hand. "You need professional guidance with this, Rachel, both legal and personal. Your family is counting on your guilt and conflict avoidance to get what they want. You need to be prepared." That afternoon I called Diane Peterson, the clinic's attorney who had helped with everything from our original business formation to patient privacy policies. I explained the situation as objectively as possible. "This is more common than you might think," Diane told me. "Family businesses especially face these challenges, but even individual professionals deal with family members who see success as a resource to be tapped." "The clinic isn't a family business, though," I pointed out. "Exactly, and that's what we need to formalize and protect." She outlined several steps to insulate the clinic from family interference: updating the operating agreement with clear ownership and decision-making provisions, creating a formal employment policy requiring specific qualifications and experience for all positions, establishing a conflicts of interest policy, and securing all sensitive business information. "These measures aren't just about your family situation," she explained. "They're good business practices that protect the clinic's integrity and operations regardless of who's making demands." The next day I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Martin Lewis, a therapist in Great Falls whom I'd referred patients to but never thought I'd see personally. The hour-long drive gave me time to collect my thoughts. "You're describing a classic family system dynamic," Dr. Lewis observed after I shared my situation. "Your role has always been the responsible achiever, the one who makes things work while others benefit from your efforts." "But isn't family supposed to support each other?" I asked. "Am I being selfish by refusing to help them?" "There's a profound difference between support and exploitation," he said gently. "Support is reciprocal and respects boundaries. What you're describing sounds more like entitlement, a belief that they deserve access to the rewards of your hard work simply because of a biological connection." Over the course of the session, we explored my family history, the patterns established in childhood that continued into adulthood, my need for approval that had never been satisfied, the guilt that had been weaponized against me for years. "Setting boundaries isn't selfish," Dr. Lewis emphasized. "It's necessary for healthy relationships. The question isn't whether you're willing to help your family. You've demonstrated that willingness throughout your life. The question is whether they respect you enough to accept the boundaries of that help." As I drove back to Prairie Creek, a clarity began to emerge through the emotional fog. The clinic wasn't just a business, it was a healthcare institution with responsibilities to patients, staff, and the community. Compromising its integrity to satisfy family demands would betray those responsibilities. More fundamentally, allowing my family to manipulate and exploit me would perpetuate unhealthy patterns that had damaged my well-being for years. Back at the clinic, I called an emergency meeting with my core staff: Nancy, Barbara, the office manager, Dr. Wilson, who had joined the practice 2 years ago, and Thomas, who had become not just my partner but a trusted advisor. I shared the situation frankly, leaving out personal details but making clear the potential threat to the clinic's operations. We need to implement some new policies, I explained, not just because of my family situation, but because they're the right measures for a growing healthcare practice. Together, we drafted a formal hiring policy that required specific qualifications, experience, and references for all positions. We established protocols for handling outside inquiries about the clinic's operations, finances, and personnel matters. We updated security measures for our electronic systems and physical facilities. These weren't just defensive moves against my family, they were professional standards that any respectable medical practice should maintain. That evening, alone in my home office, I wrote the most difficult letter of my life. Addressed to my immediate family, parents, brother, and sister, it laid out clearly and compassionately my position on their demands. I acknowledged our shared history and the complex emotions that came with it. I expressed genuine wish for their happiness and success. I affirmed my willingness to offer appropriate support, career advice, professional references, even limited financial assistance in true emergencies. But I drew a firm line: the clinic was a professional healthcare institution, not a family business or employment agency. All positions required specific qualifications and experience. All hiring decisions would follow established protocols. No exceptions would be made based on family connections. I value our relationship, I wrote in closing, but that relationship must be based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries. I hope we can move forward with a healthier dynamic that honors both our family connection and our individual life choices. The response was swift and predictable. Jason called, leaving a voicemail threatening to never speak to me again if I didn't reconsider. My mother sent a tearful message about how I'd abandoned family values and forgotten where I came from. My father's text was brief but cutting: your grandparents would be ashamed. Each message felt like a physical blow, but beneath the pain was a growing certainty that I was making the necessary choice, not just for myself, but for everyone who depended on the clinic's integrity and stability. Thomas brought dinner that night, sensing I needed support. We sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in spectacular oranges and purples. I feel like I'm betraying them, I admitted, but I'd be betraying everyone else if I gave in. That's the thing about healthy boundaries, Thomas replied. They often feel wrong at first because we're not used to prioritizing our well-being, but they are necessary for genuine relationships. What if they never speak to me again? Then that's their choice, he said gently, and it would reveal that their interest was never truly in a relationship with you, but in what they could get from you. The truth of his words settled over me, painful but clarifying. For years I'd chased my family's approval and support, making myself smaller, taking on responsibilities beyond my share, accepting blame to keep peace. The pattern had continued into adulthood: me giving, them taking, the dynamic never changing despite my achievements and independence. The next morning I sent a formal email to extended family members who had contacted my staff, attaching the clinic's new hiring policy and stating unequivocally that all inquiries about employment must go through proper channels. I instructed my staff to direct any family calls to me rather than engaging in discussions about the clinic's operations. I also contacted Prairie Creek's small local newspaper, suggesting a feature about healthcare career opportunities in rural settings, including information about the education, training, and experience required for various medical roles. The resulting article, while never mentioning my family situation, made clear to anyone in town that the clinic maintained professional standards in all hiring decisions. The most difficult step was instructing my staff to no longer provide information about me or the clinic to my brother should he follow through on his threat to move to Prairie Creek. The thought of appearing paranoid or defensive made me uncomfortable, but Diane had emphasized the importance of protecting the clinic's operations from potential interference. "You're not being paranoid," Nancy reassured me when I shared my concerns. "You're being prudent. Any healthcare facility should have these protections in place." The weeks that followed were among the most challenging of my life. family messages alternated between anger, manipulation, and occasional genuine hurt that made me question my decisions. I continued seeing Dr. Lewis, working through the complex emotions of establishing boundaries with family for the first time in my life. The support from Prairie Creek surprised and touched me deeply. Somehow word had spread about outsiders trying to interfere with the clinic. Patients expressed concern, offering encouragement and gratitude for the care we provided. Staff members stepped up, taking on extra responsibilities when I needed time for legal consultations or therapy appointments. Thomas remained steadfast, neither pushing me toward decisions nor pulling me away from necessary actions, simply providing the stable presence I'd never had in my family relationships. Gradually, a remarkable thing happened. As my family's demands receded in importance, still painful but no longer threatening, I found myself standing taller, speaking more confidently, making decisions without the shadow of guilt that had followed me for years. The weight I hadn't known I was carrying began to lift. In its place grew something new and unfamiliar, a sense of personal agency and self-respect that no achievement or accolade had ever provided. I formally notified my family that all clinic positions required proper applications, qualifications, and experience, no exceptions. The message was brief, professional, and final. No justifications, no lengthy explanations, no emotional appeals, just a clear boundary, firmly drawn. For the first time in my life, I had said no without guilt or endless explanations. I had chosen to protect what I'd built rather than sacrifice it to unhealthy family dynamics. I had put the needs of my patients, my staff, and myself ahead of the demands of people who had contributed nothing to my success but expected to share in its rewards. It wasn't a victory, there was too much sadness for that, but it was something equally important, a necessary step toward a healthier life and a more sustainable future for everything I'd worked so hard to build. 6 months passed, bringing Montana's harsh winter and the quiet healing that sometimes comes with difficult choices. The immediate crisis with my family had subsided, leaving in its wake both pain and unexpected growth. Jason never followed through on his threat to move to Prairie Creek. After a month of angry messages and accusations, he'd accepted a sales position with a company in Florida as far from Montana as he could reasonably get. Our communication had become minimal but civil, limited to brief text exchanges on birthdays and holidays. The relationship was damaged but not destroyed, existing in a fragile truce that might, with time and patience, evolve into something healthier. My parents' journey toward understanding had been slower and more painful. For weeks after my boundary-setting letter, they had oscillated between tearful appeals and cold silence. Mom had called me heartless for abandoning family, while Dad had retreated into disapproving silence. The accusations hurt deeply, reopening childhood wounds of never feeling quite good enough despite my achievement. Gradually, though, something shifted. Perhaps it was the consistent nature of my boundaries, or maybe my parents had reflected on our family dynamics. 3 months after the confrontation, Mom called with a different tone, less demanding, more tentative. "I've been thinking about what you said," she admitted, "about support being reciprocal. Your father and we may not have been as present as we could have been during your education and career." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the patterns I'd described, but it was something, a crack in the wall of denial that had characterized our relationship for decades. We began speaking weekly, our conversations careful but increasingly genuine. Dad occasionally joined these calls, his gruff manner softening slightly as we found neutral topics to discuss: Montana weather, Chicago sports teams, neighborhood news from my childhood home. The reconciliation was tentative and incomplete, marked by occasional relapses into old patterns. Mom still sometimes hinted at financial needs or job opportunities for distant relatives. Dad still occasionally made cutting remarks about my fancy doctor life. But these instances became less frequent, and I became more adept at redirecting conversations without guilt or defensiveness. Some extended family members no longer spoke to me at all, having sided firmly with the narrative that I had abandoned my family once I achieved success. Aunt Linda, in particular, had become a vocal critic, spreading stories about my betrayal at family gatherings I no longer attended. The estrangement hurt, but Dr. Lewis had helped me understand that some relationships couldn't be salvaged without sacrificing my well-being, a price I was no longer willing to pay. Meanwhile, the clinic continued to thrive, expanding in ways I'd always envisioned but had been too consumed by family drama to implement. We had launched a mental health services division, bringing in a psychiatric nurse practitioner who provided medication management and a licensed counselor who offered therapy 3 days a week. The need had been even greater than we anticipated, with appointment slots filling immediately and a waiting list forming within weeks. The community had embraced these new services with overwhelming gratitude. In a region where mental health resources had been virtually non-existent, the ability to receive care without driving hours to Great Falls or Billings made a profound difference. Farmers struggling with depression, teenagers battling anxiety, new mothers experiencing postpartum challenges all could now find help within their own community. I had organized Prairie Creek's first community health fair, transforming the high school gymnasium into a comprehensive wellness center for a weekend. Clinic staff provided free blood pressure screenings, diabetes risk assessments, and basic health education. Local dentists, chiropractors, and alternative medicine practitioners joined us, creating a holistic approach to community wellness. Over 600 people attended, nearly a quarter of the town's population, many receiving preventative screenings they'd neglected for years due to cost or accessibility. The fair's success had led to a monthly health education series at the community center, addressing topics from nutrition and exercise to mental health and chronic disease management. These sessions created a space for community building around health, reducing the stigma of seeking care and encouraging preventative approaches to wellness. Perhaps most meaningful was the mentorship program I'd established with the University of Montana Medical School. Twice a year, we welcomed medical students for rural rotation experiences, giving them hands-on exposure to the challenges and rewards of rural healthcare. 2 former students had already expressed interest in returning to Prairie Creek after completing their residencies, a promising development in a region chronically underserved by medical professionals. Through all these initiatives, the clinic had become more than just a healthcare facility. It was a community institution, a source of pride for Prairie Creek, and a model for rural health innovation across the state. The boundaries I'd established with my family hadn't diminished the clinic's impact, they had enhanced it by allowing me to focus fully on its mission without the drain of unhealthy demands. My personal life had flourished as well. Thomas had proposed on a snowy evening in December, getting down on one knee in front of the Christmas tree we decorated together. The ring was extravagant. We both preferred to invest in our future rather than jewelry, but the promise it represented filled a space in my heart I hadn't realized was empty. "I want to build a life with you," he said simply, "not because of what you've achieved or what you can provide, but because of who you are, your compassion, your determination, your integrity." The contrast between his unconditional support and my family's conditional love couldn't have been more striking. With Thomas, I never had to earn acceptance through achievement or sacrifice. I could simply be myself, flaws and all, and know that was enough. Our engagement had brought another challenge with my family expectations about wedding planning, guest lists, and their roles in the ceremony, but the boundaries I'd established served me well here too. We made our own decisions, communicated them clearly, and accepted that not everyone would approve. The wedding would be small, intimate, and truly reflective of our values rather than family expectations. My connection to Prairie Creek had deepened through these challenges. I'd always appreciated the community's support of the clinic, but now I understood that I'd found something I'd sought all my life, a place where I truly belonged, not because of achievement or obligation, but because of mutual respect and genuine connection. Nancy had become a surrogate mother figure, dispensing wisdom from her 73 years of life experience. The clinic staff felt like extended family, the healthy kind that celebrated successes and supported through difficulties without keeping score or making demands. Patients greeted me by name at the grocery store, sharing updates about their grandchildren or garden harvests. This was the community I'd chosen, and that had chosen me in return. The confidence that came with standing my ground had transformed my professional presence as well. I spoke more assertively at medical conferences, published articles about rural healthcare innovation, and advocated more effectively for resources and policy changes. The shadow of family approval no longer hung over my achievements, allowing me to take full ownership of my expertise and impact. On a crisp spring evening, I sat on my porch overlooking the town, watching lights flicker on as dusk settled over Prairie Creek. Thomas was attending a school board meeting, and I welcomed the solitude to reflect on the journey of the past year. The pain of family conflict hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still moments of sadness, still occasions when I longed for the unconditional support that seemed to come naturally in other families, but alongside that pain had grown something new, a profound sense of peace with my decisions, a clarity about my worth that didn't depend on others' validation. I had built my clinic from nothing but determination and dreams. I had faced down threats to its integrity from the most unexpected source, and I had emerged stronger, clearer, and more whole than I'd been before the crisis. The experience had taught me that success built through hard work and sacrifice couldn't be claimed by those who had contributed nothing to its creation. More importantly, it had shown me that healthy relationships, whether family, romantic, or community, were based on mutual respect and appropriate boundaries, not obligation or entitlement. My family relationships continued to evolve, some healing gradually, others perhaps permanently altered. I remained open to reconciliation based on healthier dynamics. While accepting that such healing might not be possible with everyone, the grief of that reality remained. But it no longer overshadowed the joy of the life and community I'd created. As darkness fell over Prairie Creek, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me, not just for what I'd built, but for what I'd protected through difficult but necessary choices. The clinic would continue to serve this community for years to come, its mission and integrity intact. And I would continue to grow into the person I was meant to be, no longer constrained by unhealthy family expectations but guided by my own values and vision. The journey hadn't been what I expected, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be, home to myself at last. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family or friends to protect something you've built? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content like this. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how much you give to those who only appear when they need something. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you the strength to protect what matters most in your own life.